the juiciest scandal in Cincinnati. It was not the food or the music that outraged Cincinnati. It was the two women dressed as Catholic nuns.
It's time for stand-up history. Yes, indeed. 7 o'clock on the third Wednesday of the month. Welcome to Muse Cafe. Welcome to stand-up history. Everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? Yeah, feeling good about this? Yeah, act like you're having some fun. Yeah.
Hey!
This makes my job a lot easier, I can tell you that. Great weather today, huh? Well, we're glad you're here. My name is Michael Farina, and I will be your master of ceremonies for tonight's entertainment. By way of introduction, I'm often described as a man who never really takes anything seriously, which means you shouldn't take anything I say seriously either.
I never do.
I'm glad to hear it. As to my qualifications to be MC of stand-up history,
it's the hat.
You're undercutting my shit, man. I'm proud to say that I graduated summa cum laude from the Camp Washington Institute of Autodidactic Studies, where I earned my doctorate from its prestigious School of Braggadocio. Since returning to Cincinnati 8 years ago, I've done nothing of any great importance.
You can say that again.
That's why I fit in with this bunch of right here. Okay? Thank you, Jim. You can tell we love each other. Although many people don't know it, Cincinnati's history suffered with murdering shenanigans. I'm looking at you, Amy. Gang activity. I'm looking at you again. Bicycling prostitutes. Riverborne theatrics. Orgies. Fire trucks. There we go. Thanks, Chad. Riverborne theatrics. Orgies. Collapsing buildings. Body snatchers. Lavish taverns. Political ambitions. Looking at Clinton. Bizarre amusements. Local food quirks. Astronomical battles. I'm looking at these. And more. In other words, stand-up history is a gold mine of archaic lore regarding Cincinnati's weird and fascinating history. In fact, I think I can say without fear of contradiction that stand-up history is the greatest entertainment concept yet conceived in the 21st century.
Yeah! Yeah.
There you go. Tonight, our distinguished slate of mischievous jonglers include Amy Whalen, Dean Reagan, Clint Terry, and Greg Mann. So what do you say we have some fun? Maybe a few laughs, maybe a couple of creepy shivers, or two, right? Let's all sit back, relax, and give a round of applause for our first presenter, Greg Mann.
Woo!
Well, as many of you know, we have a tradition among the group here where a week or two before the production, Greg will send out an email and tell everyone to send me their introduction ideas, how they want to be introduced.
Boy, did I screw up.
But anyway, I sent to Greg recently. What did he come back with? He said, just basically improvise, which of course leaves it wide open for me.
Big mistake.
I have to say that in introduction, Greg is weird with a beard, literally. He's so far out, he's back in. Way too knowledgeable about prostitution in the 1800s. Right, yeah. He's committed to history. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. He should be committed for the rest of history. And lastly, readily admits he's old, ugly, and still cannot dance. I see him. Yeah. But he's also a bona fide Cincinnati curiosity. He runs a blog called Cincinnati Curiosities. And he wrote a book. Guess what it's called? Cincinnati Curiosities. Thank you guys. You guys are working with me. I love this. This is awesome. And he also contributes curious bits about local history to Cincinnati Magazine. And now, duly and respectfully introduced, here's Greg to tell us about the Goldsmith orgy. Any bicycles involved?
No.
Okay. The Goldsmith orgy, a 1903 scandal that shook the pillars of the Boss Cox machine. Right
Yeah, we're going to be talking about orgies tonight. Everybody loves orgies, right? You know who doesn't love orgies? The society ladies over on the east side of town. They don't like orgies. You know why? You know why they don't like orgies? Because it takes all the next day to write the thank you notes. So anybody here been to an orgy? Okay. Got a couple of people confessing over here. So did you write me a thank you note? Must have got lost in the mail. So anyway, a lot of us suffer from the delusion that we have attended some wild parties, you know, especially the day after. You begin wondering about that. But here's the question. Have you ever attended a party that made the front page of the newspaper? No? No. For three solid weeks of coverage? No. Did any of your social wingdings involve a statement by the Archbishop? No. I think not. Did any of your parties threaten to upset the mayoral race in Cincinnati? No. Again, I think not. So let us meet Moses Goldsmith. Moses was born into poverty. His parents were German Jewish immigrants, and Moses was born around 1848 in Cincinnati. He was the oldest of four sons in the Goldsmith family. As a teenager, to keep the family afloat, Moses was a street peddler. He would wander the streets selling shoestrings, popcorn, other kinds of items throughout the city. And he saved his pennies up, and he bought a 4-story building at Findlay Market, which curiously, a Cincinnati curiosity, curiously still exists, but it's only 1 story tall. There was apparently a fire in the thing, and when it got taken care of, the building was very short. It's now, I think it's called the Columns. It's an event center down at Findlay Market. Anyway, from this 4-story shop, he sold notions, toys, stationery, and fireworks, which is probably why the building is only 1 story tall right now. It was quite profitable. Moses took the profits, invested in real estate, accumulating a portfolio that in 1900 was worth $500,000. If you do the inflationary math, that's about $20 million today. So in 1897, Moses constructed this fine stone mansion at 836 Beecher Street in Walnut Hills. And it was here that he invited about 60 of his closest friends to a party in 1903. The menu was substantial. There were separate courses of halibut, beef tenderloin, roast duck, chicken croquettes, and stuffed squab. The palate cleansers and desserts included ice cream, Charlotte Russe and bonbons, camembert cheese and coffee supplemented cigars as the last course. Libations ranged from punch to fine German Riesling wines to sherry. There were quite a series of toasts, mainly by the ladies in attendance. Music was provided by a mandolin club. What happened to the button? Luckily, I have spare batteries. Because we cannot escape the mandolin club, you know? No one wants to miss. There's actually, we got a young lady who works in the archives at UC. She can attest to this. The University of Cincinnati had a mandolin club in 1902 that did a show in Loveland, and they were banned from entering the city ever since. So here's the music at this Moses event, a mandolin club of 22 young women. There was also a minstrel group in blackface. There was 2 full orchestras and a handful of wandering soloists providing all the musical accompaniment. Every guest received a basket containing French lace handkerchiefs and a bouquet of orange blossoms. The Cincinnati Enquirer on the 22nd of March, 1903, was mightily impressed and said, "The guests heartily applauded of all of Mr. Goldsmith's devices for their entertainment, and it was the unanimous verdict that the affair in all its features was the most elaborate and costly ever given in Cincinnati. It was a feast that the epicures of Rome might have attended with pride." Now, who were these 60 or so guests that attended this? The newspaper published an entire list. This is what you did back in the day. The society pages list everybody who came to your party last night. And the top of the list was Boss Cox himself, George Barnsdale Cox, the boss of Cincinnati, the guy who controlled who was not only running, but who was going to get elected because he controlled all the ballot boxes. And so along with him was his chief lieutenant, Augustus Gary Herman, who had a nice cushy job as head of the waterworks and raked in enough money to buy this little athletic group called the Cincinnati Reds. It was Gary Herman, by the way, who invented the World Series. They were the guests at this event. So within 48 hours, Moses Goldsmith little soiree became known as the Goldsmith Incident. And it was the juiciest scandal in Cincinnati. It was not the food or the music that outraged Cincinnati. It was the 2 women dressed as Catholic nuns who met the guests at the door. And according to the Cincinnati Post, the 2 girls who impersonated nuns are employed as substitutes in the ballet at a local theater. Both girls are extremely handsome and made a decided hit later in the evening when they danced an Oriental dance in costumes less saintly than those prescribed for women who have renounced the world. The Post described the habits as being the type worn by the Sisters of Mercy. The Enquirer, relying on different sources, described them as the type worn by the Sisters of Charity. But both papers not only agreed that they were dressed as some sort of nun, but they quoted Mr. Goldsmith himself bragging about it. Goldsmith was quite pleased with the effect. According to the newspapers, he said, "Yes, it was quite a new idea. I thought I would give my guests a taste of the church first and then show them the hoochie coochie." The Goldsmith party took place on Saturday evening, March 21st. Cincinnati's mayoral election was set that year for April 6th. Back then, the local elections were in April. The state and federal were in November. So overnight, the Goldsmith party was transformed into the Goldsmith orgy. And the reception became a real weight around the neck of the Cox political machine. A citizens committee running against Boss Cox's chosen candidate comprised Democrats, socialists, and a couple of liberal Republicans. And Goldsmith just handed the opposition a ticket to a delicious campaign scandal. And he handed the Cincinnati newspapers fodder for their front pages. The ink-stained wretches ran with it, publishing every burp of outrage and denial on the front pages for a couple of weeks. So here's a cartoon from the Cincinnati Post 1 week afterward showing the change in Moses' fortunes. So on one side of the cartoon, we see him, the toast of the Cox machine. That's Boss Cox himself on the left, raising a glass in his honor. And a week later, Goldsmith was nowhere to be seen. Here's Boss Cox with a hatchet and his lieutenant Gary Herman with a pistol chasing Mr. Goldsmith into the wilderness. So the political opposition accused Goldsmith and the Cox Party of endorsing blasphemy. This message resonated with the city's growing Roman Catholic population, and Dr. Thomas P. Hart, who was the editor of the Catholic Telegraph, let go with a scorcher. Hart said, "What sort of man is he, maliciously and without the semblance of an excuse, who casts a reflection upon the pure Catholic sisterhood, whose members have at all times shown themselves to be the good guardian angels of humanity whenever and wherever their services were in demand." We know about your story with the nuns. Next show. So the Cox machine was supporting Mayor Julius Fleischmann for re-election. He'd been elected a couple of years before. He hated the job. He hated the job so much, with the election coming up, he decided not to campaign, but to spend his time in New York enjoying the wealth brought on by his dad's yeast factory and distillery. Cox, who wanted him reelected, said if he doesn't return to town, he better not return to town. So Fleischmann came back in the middle of this scandal. The Catholic Telegraph, without being absolutely overt, made clear that its readers understood, A, that Goldsmith was Jewish, and so was Fleischmann. So this gets into really complicated politics here. So the electorate turns its gaze upon Cincinnati's Jews, prompting Rabbi David Phillipson of the Mound Street Temple to issue his public statement. Unfortunately, and as a usual thing, no Jew can do anything reprehensible but that the fact of his being a Jew is called attention to. We have protested against this time and again, but the world has not yet learned the lesson that the individual Jew who offends should be judged and denounced as an individual and not as a Jew. So the Cox machine, watching this religious battle develop, appealed behind the scenes to Cincinnati's Archbishop William Henry Elder to say something, anything, to diffuse the growing fight between the Catholics and the Jewish citizens of Cincinnati. There's this delicious book published in 1905 by a guy named Henry Wright, Bossism in Cincinnati, in which Wright explains that the Archbishop did just that. An appeal was made to Archbishop Elder to make a public statement that Fleischmann's father had befriended the Catholic Church and that the incident had no bearing on the candidacy of his son. The Archbishop would not speak at first, but later published such a statement. This smoothed the troubled water somewhat and eased the consciences of Catholic voters who wanted to support Fleischmann's. So, who was the other candidate? The other candidate was a guy named Melville Ingalls. You may have heard of Melville Ingalls because of the Ingalls building. It's the very first skyscraper in the world. It was financed by this gentleman with profits he earned as the president of the Big Four Railroad. Ingalls was, by all accounts, a nice guy. He was scandal-free, and he was a Unitarian. So nobody had anything on him. He largely avoided mentioning Goldfish or Goldsmith, his guests, or the ersatz nuns in his campaign speeches, but he didn't need to because the whole city knew all about it. Moses Goldsmith's guests, however, spent a great deal of energy in what would later be called damage control or spin. Early on, several were quoted as denying there were any women dressed as nuns at all at the party. These women, they said, were dressed as nurses. Obviously. Someone pointed out that nurses dressed in whites, and these women were dressed in black. So this led them to say, oh, did we say nurses? We got a new theory. They actually bought an advertisement in the newspaper that said, as the early guests reached the house, the front doors were opened by two female attendants dressed as dominoes. This is a domino. This is a domino. A domino dressed as dominoes and not in the garb of a sister of charity. The host may have intended to represent this order, although he denies it. But if he did so, none of his guests had any knowledge that they were supposed to be nuns. Right. A domino is actually a character in the Italian Commedia dell'arte. The women who portray dominoes are clad mostly in black, a luxuriant dress. They wear a black half mask, and the half masks are still known as dominoes. This was a very common costume for women at masquerade balls. The theory is hardly convincing, but at least they got the color correct. So, having unleashed a scandal into the political arena, Cincinnati newspapers found themselves on the defensive. Suddenly people were turning around. Hey, they bought an ad saying they were dominoes, not none, and basically responded to charges of what today might be called fake news. And so the Cincinnati Post, in a front page defense on April 2nd, right before the election, actually quoted their competitor, the Inquirer, reminding readers that Moses Goldsmith himself proudly called the newspaper's attention to his bogus nuns and bragged about it. Boss Cox, ever the survivor, cornered by the Inquirer on the 27th of March, a week after the event, claimed absolute ignorance of anything that may or may not have transpired at the Goldsmith Mansion on the prior weekend. He said, and I quote, "I can't tell you because neither Mrs. Cox nor myself was present." Uh-huh. So, when the votes were counted, the entire affair was exposed as sort of a tempest in a teapot. Fleischman got reelected with a plurality of 15,000 votes. Ingalls and the Citizens Party carried, they're the blue ones. They covered only a few very heavily Catholic wards in Price Hill and the West End. So the boss was still in charge. So, lesson of the evening, if you want your next party to have any effect on history, you gotta try harder. Thank you very much.